years ago, I was at a customer on a performance engagement, and they asked me a question I couldn't answer. They were having some problems with Kerberos configuration and managed service accounts. I was kind of like a deer in the headlights. I really didn't know anything about Kerberos Delegation. And so that weekend, I decided to do something about that problem. I already had a virtual machine lab set up for always-on availability group, so I already had a domain controller, everything for that set up, and I spent the weekend trying to figure out how to set up Kerberos Delegation for SSRS. It took me the whole weekend, and what was really crazy is that I already had the lab set up. I didn't even spend time working on that piece. The problem was that when I would go out and Bing or Google for information, I found lots of videos, I found lots of documents and blogs, but I didn't find one resource that had everything together. And I found out that Kerberos Delegation is actually pretty simple to set up. The problem with it is there are several steps, and it's very easy to make a mistake. I set it up in this tiny little virtual lab on a laptop, but in an enterprise environment where you have many domain controllers, a more complex situation, just even that fact of the settings being replicated around could make you think you've done something wrong when you haven't. I'm Kathi Kellenberger, and I am a database consultant, and I do a lot of performance tuning, ETL type work. I'm really proud of what I've been able to contribute to the SQL Server community. I write books for A-Press, and I also record courses for Pluralsight. And in fact, I have a Pluralsight course configuring Kerberos for SSRS that goes into a lot really more detail, more different scenarios than we can cover here. I think it's about a 3-hour course, and I go into a lot of different types of situations, such as grouped managed service accounts and SSRS on why can I not think of that? SharePoint. Couldn't think of SharePoint for a second. SSRS integrated with SharePoint, some other interesting configurations. In today's session, I'm going to talk about just a very simple setup where I have a domain controller, a SQL server, an SSRS server, and a client. So as simple as we can get. This is what we're going to talk about today. Why do we need to know about this? Why is it important? There are actually 3 tasks that we have to do. And no matter if, what the situation is, there's 3 tasks. However, the steps in each task will be different depending on what the application is and what you're trying to accomplish. We're going to configure SPNs. I've also heard this called SPNs. I'll just call it SPN. And that's an Active Directory property of a service account. We're going to set a delegation property, which is again just a Active Directory property. And there's also some app configuration. Now, for reporting services in native mode, that app configuration is very, very simple. In SharePoint, which, like I said, I'm not going to go into today, it's pretty complex. Oops, one more thing. The name Kerberos came from a mythical 3-headed guard dog named Sir Bruce. It was kind of funny. I have a 10-year-old grandson, and when I was first working on putting together Kerberos materials, he saw that, and he's the one that told me about Sir Bruce. And then I looked it up, and sure enough, he was right. So that's what Kerberos is named after. The other interesting thing is that a lot of DBAs are very, very afraid of this topic. They just avoid it. The thing is, I've run into people, some of my clients, and also people at SQL Saturdays that had a particular issue that is related to Kerberos, even if they're not involving SSRS. And I'll be able to demonstrate that. There's a particular error message that you may have seen. The target principal name is incorrect when you try to connect to a SQL server. And I'll talk about why that could happen and how to fix it. So first, let's start with why we need this. That little smiley face there is the end user computer. Imagine that you request a report from reporting services. The Active Directory domain controller has to be involved to verify to the reporting services server that you are who you say you are. That way, the reporting services server can make sure that the report you requested is something that you are allowed to see, that you're allowed to run. If the data source is configured to run as the user requesting the report, the reporting services server will then request the data from the database. In most situations, that's going to be a different server. It's probably not going to be all in one box. Now, I know there's situations where everything is on one box. If that's the case, you don't have to worry about any of this. So the problem is that we need to verify at the database level that that pink smiley face there has permissions to read the data. To really do that, we would need to get the domain controller involved again, but we can't because now we're involving 4 computers, and really with NTLM authentication, the old-fashioned authentication, we cannot involve 4, we can only involve 3. So what happens is SQL Server says, sorry, we cannot give you that data because you can't verify who's requesting it. That's called the double hop problem. This is only going to come into play if we have the reporting services and the data on separate servers and we've configured this for run the report as the user requesting it. Some places avoid this problem by storing the credentials in the data source. If you store the credentials there, it could be a SQL account, it could actually even be a Windows account. If you store those credentials there, then the 3 computers actually becomes the domain controller, reporting services, and the database. This guy is not involved at that point. So SQL Server says, sure, I trust that that person and that person has, or that account has rights. So we're going to return the data. Reporting service is going to build the report and return it to the client. So if you do this, it may or may not be acceptable in your environment. And also, just as an aside, to do subscriptions, you have to have stored credentials. So you may be doing that in your environment, may not. So Kerberos Delegation works like this. Our little pink guy there requests a report, but this time the domain controller creates a ticket that is stored on the client computer, and it's stored for a certain amount of time. Not sure exactly how long that is, but it's stored there for a while. That ticket has the encrypted credentials, and it can be passed along to reporting services, and reporting services can use that to verify that the end user is who he says he is and that he has rights. That ticket, oops, went a little too fast. That ticket is then passed along to the SQL Server, and the SQL Server can also use the ticket to verify the rights. SQL Server returns the data, and the report's generated and returned to the person. Well, that's what we would like to see happen. Another interesting thing is if there's the SPNs are incorrect in the environment, you may not even be able to correctly connect to a SQL server using your account. And I'll show a demonstration of that. And why would that happen? Why would the SPNs be incorrect? Well, one thing that I've seen happen at a couple customers is that they installed SQL Server, but they didn't have the service account that they wanted to use. So they went ahead and installed as a local service. Then, a couple weeks down the road, they set up the new service account in SQL, and then all of a sudden they started having these problems. The reason for that is that the original SPN is still out in Active Directory, and it needs to be deleted before the new SPN can go into place. So I've seen that happen at a couple customers, and that's the big question that people come in at SQL Saturdays. I always have one or two people when I present this topic that have that exact problem, and I'll show you that error when we get to it. So another nice thing about Kerberos is that we are going to save some time. Because we cache this ticket on the client, we don't have to keep going back to the domain controller for this specific situation. Again, there's a time limit on that ticket and how long it can sit there. First task, there's only 3 things we have to do. We've got to get these exactly right, and that's part of the issue. We have to configure SPNs. So what are these? It's a service principal name, and it's actually a property of the service account. Okay, so the service account has this property pointing to the particular service. Now, if we're using a local service account, if we've used like network service or something to start SQL, we can't set that up in Active Directory. So in that case, we're going to use the computer name. It's going to be a property of the computer name instead of the service account name. So if I install SQL Server just using the local service account, that's what will be used. And then later, if I go in and change the service account, that's where the problem comes in, because this property is still stuck in Active Directory, and this one can't get set. There is a utility that we can use to configure this called Set SPN. There are several options. Here are the 3 I use. L, to list the registrations for a particular service account. S will register an SPN, and D will delete an SPN. If some of you are familiar with Kerberos, you may have heard of A also, which will register an SPN. I don't recommend that because depending on which version of Active Directory is running in your environment, that one will actually let you make some mistakes. So I would always use S. It's going to give you an error message instead of letting you add duplicate SPNs. And if you have duplicate SPNs, then that's, a whole nother problem I'm not really going to try to solve in this case. Here's the command. Set SPN -S, we want to register an SPN, the service name, the fully qualified host name, and then the domain and service account. So the service name is specific for the type of service. For example, reporting services is a web site, right? So the service name is HTTP. For SQL Server, the service name is always MS SQL Service. And so whatever that specific type of service, that's what you'll fill in here. Here you'll put the fully qualified computer name and then your service account. So if we're using a local service account, we'll put this computer name there. So for SQL Server, we also need to have a second one with a colon and the port number. So that's another thing to keep in mind, is that you should have static ports. Don't change your ports because that could cause the SPN to be incorrect. So on task 1, here's some sample set SPN commands. So it's MS SQL SVC. Here's the fully qualified domain of a SQL server, and here's the service account. Here's the second one. These first two go together along with the port. This particular SQL server has 2 instances. So we have another one with the instance name. Notice we have a colon here, not a slash, and then along with the port. So for the SQL server, for the particular instance, we have 2 SPNs we must configure. For the reporting services instance, there's one we must configure. Starts with HTTP, here's the reporting services name, and the service account. So this is probably the hardest thing, and I'll show you how to figure out what it should be, especially for the SQL server. The next task is setting the delegation property. So you got to figure out which computer in the mix needs this setup, or which account in the mix. The reporting services server is going to be delegating the credentials, or delegating or passing through the credentials to the SQL server. So we need to set it up on the reporting services account. We don't need to set it up on the SQL account. If we do, it probably is not going to matter. You do this in Active Directory users and computers, and there's a special delegation tab that is only going to show up if the SPN has been configured. If there's no SPN, you won't see the delegation tab. There's also a property, it's probably not checked, but make sure that account is sensitive and cannot be delegated is not checked. If that's somehow got checked, this will not work. The third task is probably the easiest. You have to go into the report server config file and add this key right here. Then restart the services. Now, after you set the SPN for SQL Server, you probably want to also restart. When I did the 24 hours of HOP presentation, or 24 hours of PASS presentation last month, I didn't restart the SQL Server, and Kerberos didn't seem like it was set up right, but I couldn't figure out what was wrong. After restarting, everything worked. And what's interesting is that when I had tested everything the weekend before, I didn't need to restart the SQL Server. So probably just add restarting the SQL Server as a step just in case. So I feel like I'm either brave or crazy, but I'm going to show you how to set up SSRS delegation, or Kerberos delegation for SSRS. I'm going to do it live. We'll see what happens. I have 4 virtual machines. I have a domain controller, which we aren't really going to need to look at, but it's important that we are in a domain. I have a client computer. I have a reporting services computer, and I have a SQL computer. So first, let's start with the client computer. I'm logged in as the account report user, and I'm using a native reporting services here. And if it looks funny to you, that's because I'm using reporting services SQL Server 2016. And I've got a little Dropbox icon showing up. I wonder if I can make that go away. All right, so this is the new web portal that replaced the old report manager. So this report works. I'm logged in as report user. This report works. And notice it's got this big message up here that I've connected by a SQL account. And I went ahead and got this one running ahead of time because since I've got 4 VMs running on my laptop, I don't have a lot of resources allocated to each one, and it takes a bit for that report to run. So it does work. Let me go back to home. I also have a report categories that's set up using an Active Directory account. So it's set up, run as the user requesting the report. And hopefully it won't take too long to do this. So this is the double hop issue. This is the problem that we're going to see. And I wish it would not take so long. While we're waiting for that, oh, there it goes. I was going to hop over to reporting service. So we get this error, cannot create a connection to the data source. So I immediately get on the phone and call the DBA and complain about this problem. I am going to log out, because that's another thing you should do, is have your customer log out. After you think everything is configured, have them log out and log back in, because that can also affect things. So, or at least it seems to me like it does. All right, so I'm now the DBA, and I am remote controlling my reporting services server. And I just bring this up and take a look at the data sources. So let me go back here. This report, the data source is AdventureWorks AD account. So let's take a look at that data source and see what's up with it. We look at the properties, log into the data source as the user viewing the report. So Kerberos must be set up in order for this to work. Or Kerberos Delegation must be set up. So as a troubleshooting step, let's just see if we can connect to our SQL server. So I'm going to connect. It's the name of the machine is SQL, and I get this message: the target principal name is incorrect. Cannot generate SSPI context. What in the world does that mean? And this is the error message that my customers have gotten, and also people coming to my SQL Saturdays presentation have gotten. What is causing this problem? So let's jump over to the SQL server. Okay, so here's the SQL server. Now, if I take a look at the error log, I will see, let me do a search for SPN. This will actually tell me part of the SPN command. The SQL Server network interface could not register the service principal name, and then it's got that MS SQL SVC /SQL KKC. So that's the service part of it. I also need to know the service account. So if we come over here and take a look at the service account, I can see that it's KKC /SQL service. So it's a domain service account. So I have the two pieces that I need. Okay, so what I'm going to do is bring up PowerShell, or it could be just a DOS command prompt, but PowerShell is pretty handy right there. And I am going to set up an SPN based on what it told me I needed. So let me just copy this, and hopefully it copies. It's like I have to do it twice every time to get it to, there we go. So set SPN /s MS SQL service SQL.kkc.local. So this piece I was able to get out of the SQL Server log. This piece I was able to get out of the configuration manager. All right, so let's go ahead and run that. I don't know if it's just if I didn't hit enter or if it is just not doing it. Sometimes it takes a bit. There it goes. All right, so what we have, take a look at this and you see that it did not work. Duplicate SPN found, aborting operation. So what can happen in an older Active Directory environment, I'm not sure which level, if you use setSPN-A, it would let you go ahead and do this, but Kerberos still wouldn't work because now we'd have multiple SPNs for the same service. So what it's telling me is that there's already an SPN for this SQL server. And right here, it's telling me what the SPN, how the SPN is registered. So it's registered to SQL in the computers. It's registered to the SQL server itself. So this is that situation where we started with a local account and then changed to a domain account. And that local settings got stuck in Active Directory. We're going to have to manually take care of that. So what I need to do then is run a couple commands to delete these registrations. All right, so what I ran was setSPN-D MS SQL service, that's a fully qualified domain name, KKC-SQL. In this case, I'm using the computer account. That's what I need to unregister. So it unregistered, and then there's the second command where I unregistered with the port. And so in both cases, those are now gone. All right. So what I'm going to do is restart SQL. Just because after 24 hours have passed, I realized I just need to restart SQL after every one of these changes, or every one of the SPN changes. And I'm going to jump back over to my reporting services server. And hopefully it'll work. If not, I might have to log out and log back in. Still getting that error. So I am going to sign out and sign back in. Because what we have now is that we don't have any SPNs registered. That's the situation right now. Let's see. And hopefully this will work. So if I don't have any SPNs, I should be able to connect using the old NTLM authentication. There. So it went in. And I'm going to open up a little file here that lets me see the connection properties. And in each case, the authentication scheme is NTLM. Now, if there are any Kerberos connections, and this is all connections to the SQL server, if there's Kerberos connections, we would see the word Kerberos here. So at least we're connecting to the SQL server, but Kerberos is still not set up. So what we're going to do is set up the correct SPNs. So I have two. And every time I try to copy to my virtual machine, I got to do it 2 times. I'm not sure why. All right. So this time, setSPN-S, the name of our service, KKC-SQL service. So this is the account that is running the SQL server. Here's one command, and it worked, updated object. And here's the second command with the colon port, and it worked. So now I have the correct SPNs in place for SQL Server, but I probably should restart that SQL Server. Can I restart it there? Doesn't look like it. Let me go to the SQL Server here and restart it just in case. There we go. And I'm going to go back over to SSRS. Out of that, I'm going to try connecting and see if the Kerberos shows up. In the past, sometimes it doesn't show up right away, but we'll see what happens. I'm connecting. It's still not. So probably what I need to do is log out and log back in. And try it again. I'm also going to run a little command here. There's a utility called klist that shows cached tickets. I'm going to purge those out. This is one of the troubleshooting tools for Kerberos, just in case that's making a difference. I'm going to connect to the SQL Server, and I'm going to keep my fingers crossed this time that we are connecting with Kerberos Delegation, or Kerberos connection anyway. Did I not open the... There we go. So now we are connecting with Kerberos. So at least we know the SQL piece is working. All right, so the next thing we need to do is set up the SPN for reporting services. And that command is setSPN-S. HTTP is the service type right here, the fully qualified domain name, and the service account. So we'll set that up, and that worked. The next step is we must make a change in the application. So let me double click here. Here's the reporting services folder. Here is the config file. I'm just going to open that with Notepad and find the section I need. So here's the section. All I need to do is copy in this value, that value there. I'm going to close this up, and then I am going to restart reporting services. Absolutely must do this. Okay, so there's one more thing we need to do once this starts back up. In Active Directory, we need to change a property of this reporting services service account. In Active Directory, you must have the advanced features checked, or you won't be able to see what we need to see. Let me show you something on SQL Service first. Oh, it does have a delegation property. Okay. I was going to show you that the delegation property is not there if there's no SPNs set up. Well, there are. We know that it's set up there because we just did it. If I looked at another account, let's see, if we look at just the DBA account, I don't see the delegation property because there's no SPNs set up for the DBA. But once you have an SPN set up, you should be able to see the delegation tab. For native reporting services inside a domain, it's real simple. Trust the user for delegation to any service. If it's integrated, SharePoint integrated, it's a lot more complicated. If you're going across, to a trusted domain, it's more complicated. If you're using managed service accounts, it's more complicated. But for this situation, that's all you've got to do. We also need to go to the account tab and make sure that, let's see if I can find it. Account is sensitive and cannot be delegated, is not checked. I want to point out another interesting thing. On the attribute editor, apply the changes. If we look in the attribute editor, we will find service principal name, and we can see the service principal name that we added here. Guess what? You could actually add your service principal names here manually instead of writing the command. You can do it here as well. However, it will let you put junk in. You've got to have two words separated with a slash. Otherwise, it'll let you put anything in there. All right, so that's all set up. I believe I have done everything that I need to do. So let's check. Keep your fingers crossed. I'm going to go back to the client and log in. I'm also going to run this klist purge just in case. I'm going to go back to reporting services and try running the report. And if everything went right, it's going to work. While that's loading, I do want to point out that in most environments, the database administrator will not have rights to modify Active Directory properties such as the SPNs or the delegation. But guess what? If you at least understand what needs to be done, you can pass that information along to the network admin, security admin, whoever takes care of all of that. If you know how to do it or what needs to be done, that's going to be a big thing. And what I realized recently is that I have never set this up in a production environment. I have had customers who have needed help with it, and I've told them what to do. But I've never had the opportunity to set it up because I've never had rights. When I go into an environment, I generally have rights just on the SQL Server and nothing else. I don't have any rights in Active Directory. So this did work. We did connect. Everything worked. Yay. I'm going to go back to the reporting services and run this again and see. I may or may not be able to see. So there is one other connection that's just local. There's a report user connection. So we can see now that the report user is connected using Kerberos to connect to our SQL Server. So, there's one other thing I want to show you. I'm going to hop back over to the SQL box. There is a tool that you can use to help you figure this out called Kerberos Configuration Manager for SQL Server. It's a free download. However, I have not gotten it to help me with everything. Theoretically, let me go ahead and connect. I'm connecting to the local SQL Server, so all I have to do is connect there. I have not ever figured out how to get it to connect to reporting services. It could be user error on my part. It could be just me not doing something right. But I did use this tool when I was first figuring all this stuff out. Because let me show you. If I click, I'm connected to the local SQL Server. If I click the SPN and scroll over, it will tell you the status. Is it good or is it not right? So in this case, it's right. We know it's right because Kerberos Delegation is working. If it is not right, it will give you the option of saving out a script to fix it or clicking a button to fix it. And so what the script will have in it, it'll have the command to delete the incorrect SPN and the command to add the correct one. So you may not have rights in your environment to actually do that, but if you can read Active Directory, you should have rights to generate the script. And then there's also a delegation tab. Doesn't need anything. I actually haven't really used that piece. Like I said, I have not gotten this to work to connect to a reporting services. It just says, sorry, cannot find the reporting services server. So that is really everything I had today. It took less than 45 minutes for me to go through this whole thing. Again, the problem is you will not have rights most likely, and it's very easy to make a mistake. And once you've made a mistake, sometimes it's pretty difficult to figure out what that mistake was. So I encourage you to go ahead and download that Kerberos Configuration Manager just to verify that your SPNs are right on the SQL server. Sometimes if you think you've got everything right, you just got to have people log out and log back in. You may need to restart your SQL server. So even if it's right, sometimes it's not working until you kind of clear things out and go back in fresh. So I am ready for questions if there are any.
Great, thanks, Kathy. I know I certainly learned a lot today. I do have a few questions. The first is looking for clarity on whether the SQL database SPNs have to be configured properly before Kerberos works with SSRS?
Yes. Yeah, we have to have, let me go back to the slides. Before, let's see. Where do I have the 3 tasks? I think right at the beginning. All right, to get Kerberos to work, all 3 of these pieces have got to be in place and they've got to be perfect. Great. So that's why this is so hard.
Let's see, another question. Does the report user have to have a login account in SQL Server?
If you're using, so if you have the, let me bring back up reporting services. If you are using the this type of authentication as the user viewing the report, that report user must have an account in SQL. It could have an account directly in SQL, or it could be part of a group. So, you know, and then specific rights. So that answer is yes in this situation. If they don't have an account in SQL, well then you probably have your data source set up something like this, where we're actually using a different account to talk to the SQL server. So whatever makes sense in your environment is what you would do.
Okay, another user requests what AD feature, or is there an AD feature that has to be turned on before this can be used?
An AD feature has to be turned on. I'm not quite, see if you can get some clarification. I mean, I don't know. I mean, if there's something special about AD, what I did, which I'm not a domain administrator normally in my world, so all I did was the simplest Active Directory installation for my little domain. I didn't add any special properties. The only thing that I had to do was to make sure in this little command window or whatever app, I guess it's add-in here, make sure that advanced features is turned on. And that's not really an Active Directory property. That's a property of this little application. So I think the answer is no to that, unless we can get some additional clarification.
Okay. I think that's right.
Okay.
Let's see. Do you know any websites where you can find an example of how to set delegation for MSA? I'm not sure what MSA is.
Managed service accounts.
Okay.
Offhand, I do not. However, in my Pluralsight course, I do have a whole module on that. Managed service accounts and managed group service accounts. So if they can go out to Pluralsight, they can sign up for a 30-day free trial and watch my session if they would like. So they can go out there and watch it for free, or if they already have it. But offhand, I don't remember exactly what I had to do different, but I did have to jump through some hoops to get it to work.
Okay, let's see. There's a couple more. One user says they've done all 3 steps mentioned on the slide. However, when an external link created using TMG for the report manager, we are unable to access the report and the error is cannot access data source. Is there something wrong with TMG or the configuration?
What's TMG?
1 second.
Right. So I've talked, while you're figuring that out, I've talked quite a bit about needing to restart, the SQL Server, needing to start the reporting services, clearing out using the klist purge command, making sure they log out and log back in. If it's in a domain, they probably have lots of domain controllers. You've got to spend some time waiting for that information to be replicated around. So even if everything is correct, it may not work right away.
Okay.
It may take an hour. So what is the?
So what I've learned on that is the TMG stands for Threat Management Gateway.
Threat Management Gateway.
It's a Microsoft security load balancer firewall product.
Okay, so I haven't worked with that. So this is something coming in? They don't have an account inside the domain, or it's trusted domains?
I think this may be a little bit too complicated to resolve on Q&A.
Yeah, sorry. I haven't dealt with that, so.
Okay, I think that's pretty much it. Let me scan through really quick. Sure.
There are some, make sure that you run this, and I'll make sure that I send you my code and my slides, but you run that command, see if anybody is connecting to the SQL Server with Kerberos. That's one troubleshooting step. Is anybody connecting to it? Download that tool. See if that tells you if if everything's right. Just go back and double check your steps. But it may be that you have to set up the delegation property differently because it's this external piece. That was the biggest difference whenever I talked about trusted domains, things like that. Is this delegation piece could be different in their situation.
Okay. With a domain trust, you mean?
Yes. Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what their situation is, but that is, so you had to, I think if I remember, it's a long time since I thought about it, you had to come in here and then you had to add the service that you were trying to connect to. So it's a bit more complicated.
It's just what Kerberos needs is a little more complexity.
I know. Really, what I showed you is really not that complex, and this is the simplest scenario, but it's just so darn easy to make a mistake.
Okay, well, I don't see any more questions. You did say you will send me the slide deck and scripts?
Yes.
So I'll put those up on the site when I get them, and we'll also have the recording up on our YouTube channel and make that available in the next couple days. And I think that's pretty much it. So thank you very much,
Fantastic.
Kathy. It's a great presentation. I learned a lot. And I hope you have a great day. And thank you, everybody, for joining us.
Yep. Thanks to you for inviting me, and thanks to everybody who came to listen. I'll talk to you soon.
All right. Bye-bye.
Bye.